So imagine walking into a project kickoff meeting and looking your client dead in the eye, taking 10% of their entire project budget in cold, hard cash, and just throwing it straight into a paper shredder.
Oh, wow.
Right. Like before a single line of code is written or a single wireframe is even drawn. In almost any other industry, would call that theft.
You'd probably get arrested.
Exactly. But in the tech and design world, we have a much nicer term for it. We call it mandatory upfront user research.
Right.
But what if that mandatory, that sacred cow of the design process is actually just a massive waste of resources?
Man, that is a highly uncomfortable question for a lot of product teams to hear.
Oh, I bet.
Because we are conditioned right from the start to view research as this unassailable good.
Yeah.
You investigate, you learn, and therefore you build a better product.
Yeah, that's the theory anyway.
Exactly. But when you're operating in the real world, rather than like a theoretical vacuum, that unassailable good suddenly collides with the cold, hard reality of a spreadsheet. The friction between professional best practices and actual, budget constraints is super intense.
Okay, let's unpack this because we are diving into a really interesting piece of source material today that tackles this exact friction head on.
We are.
We're looking at a fascinating article published in January 2026 by Tobias Reidenhag. He's the head of design at Intunio, which is a UX design and development studio based in Gothenburg, Sweden.
Yeah, and it's a great read.
It really is. And the entire mission of our deep dive today is to evaluate his central argument, which is essentially dismantling this massive piece of professional dogma.
Right.
He argues that comprehensive upfront user research is not unconditionally mandatory.
Which is incredibly bold.
Right, especially coming from the head of design at an agency.
Exactly. An agency whose very business model often relies on, selling those exact research services. But the conflict he highlights is just so universal. Clients walk through Intunio's doors with a crystal clear vision of what they want to build, but a strictly capped budget to pull it off.
Yeah.
They don't have unlimited runway.
No one does, really.
Right. So the team immediately faces the ultimate project management dilemma. Do we spend a significant chunk of our limited money researching what we're going to build?
Or do we just take a breath and start building the thing?
Yes, exactly.
And the standard textbook answer is always going to be, well, research first. If you skip it, you're flying blind.
That's the dogma.
But the text urges us to transition away from that theoretical ideal and look at the most common scenario that agencies actually face. You have a client sitting across the table, and they're practically radiating confidence.
Oh, we all know that client.
Totally. They sit down and say, don't worry about research. We already know what the users want.
And this is where the text reveals a reality that makes a lot of traditional designers just, bristle.
Yeah.
The author points out that more often than not, those clients are actually right.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Their foundational assumptions about the product are correct.
I mean, I have a really hard time buying that at face value.
Fair enough.
Because, look, we've all worked with that out-of-touch executive who insists that millennials is on everything gamified.
Right.
Or who thinks they understand a market they haven't interacted with in 20 years. How can the text confidently claim they're right?
Well, so that out-of-touch executive stereotype certainly exists, but it's not the norm in specialized B2B or niche industries.
Okay, I can see that.
In practice, the client commissioning the work has often been operating in that specific sector for a decade. They've successfully sold similar products or services before. In a lot of cases, they are literally part of the target demographic themselves.
Oh, that makes sense.
So when you force a 3-week research sprint in those specific scenarios, it rarely yields some dramatic, earth-shattering new insight that pivots the whole company's strategy.
Because they already live and breathe it.
Exactly. The basic needs, the primary goals, the core friction points, they're usually exactly what the client thought they were. The research just confirms what was already known.
But if they are right, why do research at all? If I look out the window and see dark clouds and my knee aches, I already know it's going to rain.
Right.
I don't need to pay a certified meteorologist to hand me a report suggesting I bring an umbrella. It feels less like discovery and more like it feels like buying decision insurance.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Decision insurance.
Right. It isn't just about the design team feeling good about their empathy maps. It functions as a corporate shield.
Yep.
When the app launches, if the conversion rate tanks or users complain about a feature, The product manager or the lead designer can just pull out that thick research document and say, hey, don't look at me. The data said they wanted this.
Totally.
You're literally paying a premium to buy an alibi so that later on your design choices are defensible.
And that insurance premium is incredibly steep.
How steep are we talking?
Well, to ground this conversation in reality, we have to look at the hard numbers Intunio provides. A relatively small, lean research sprint, let's say just 2 to 3 weeks of work, conducted by a seasoned designer or UX researcher, costs around 100,000 Swedish kroner.
Wow. Okay, let's put that number into perspective based on the example in the text.
Yeah.
Say a client comes in with a total budget of 1 million kroner to design and build an entire application from scratch.
Right.
That 100,000 kroner research sprint instantly eats up 10% of the entire budget.
Exactly. Before a single feature is functional, before the back-end architecture is even mapped out, 1/10 of your total resources are simply gone.
That is a massive hit.
It really is.
If a 10% tax is so devastating for a straightforward build, it forces us to ask, why is everyone in the tech and design world so terrified to just skip it?
Right.
Why not just say, keep your 100 grand, let's build the app?
Well, it comes down to a deeply ingrained industry culture. There's an unspoken rule in the design community, a genuine dogma. The prevailing attitude is, if you don't do research, you're doing it wrong.
You're committing a professional sin.
Exactly. You risk being viewed as a lazy or irresponsible practitioner. And the author openly validates the ambition behind this dogma.
Oh, sure.
Products absolutely do get better with research. The intention is pure. But the article pivots to a much more critical, pragmatic question, which is, how much better and at what price?
Yeah, and that price aspect is what really caught my eye. We aren't just talking about money vanishing into a vacuum.
No, we're not.
We're talking about severe opportunity costs on the back end of the project.
Right.
If you spend those resources on the research phase to confirm what the client already knew, you're actively sacrificing the actual product.
Right.
The text lists exactly what suffers. You have less time for the actual design execution. You have fewer opportunities to iterate and refine the interface once it's built. You might have to accept lower technical quality because the developers are suddenly squeezed for time and budget. Or, perhaps the most painful reality, you have to cut core features from the first version of the app entirely.
This raises an important question. How do we know when that trade-off is actually worth it?
Right.
Because sacrificing technical stability or cutting essential features just to purchase decision insurance is a terrible strategic trade.
It really is.
You end up with a beautifully researched, theoretical ideal that crashes every time the user opens it.
Yeah, that's not helpful to anyone.
But on the flip side, skipping research to build a technically flawless app that fundamentally misunderstands the user's workflow is equally disastrous.
So we have to figure out the dividing line. When is that 10% tax just an optional luxury, and when is it 100% necessary for survival?
Exactly.
And the text argues it all comes down to a concept they call the rule of distance.
Yes. Intunio relies heavily on this guiding principle. The rule of distance dictates that user research becomes exponentially more important the further away the end user is from you and your development team.
Okay.
And distance here doesn't just mean physical geography. It means contextual, environmental, and psychological distance.
I love this framing. Let's look at the specific examples the article gives because they really illustrate why this contextual distance is so dangerous if left unchecked.
Definitely.
The first major category they highlight is medtech, medical technology.
Right. MedTech represents a vast, almost unbridgeable distance between the creator and the user without research.
How so?
Well, in medical technology, users are operating in high-stakes, highly regulated environments. There are massive, uncompromising demands for safety, for precision, and for accountability.
Oh, for sure.
A software developer sitting in a quiet, climate-controlled office in Gothenburg simply cannot intuit what it feels like to use a life-saving interface in a chaotic, brightly lit emergency room while a patient is coding.
Yeah, you definitely cannot move fast and break things when the thing breaking is a heart monitor.
Exactly. The stakes completely invalidate the guesswork.
Another great example the text leans into is industrial systems. We're talking about end users who are operators, factory workers, or field technicians.
Yeah, so picture that same coder in their cozy studio. Now try to mentally bridge the gap to a field technician working in a noisy, vibrating, poorly lit industrial plant.
Wow, yeah, totally different worlds.
Right. They might be wearing heavy protective gear, dealing with extreme temperatures and managing complex physical machinery alongside the digital interface. Their environments and daily workflows are just worlds apart.
And the third major category is complex B2B systems. These are business-to-business products that function as heavy-duty mandatory work tools.
Hmm.
We aren't talking about a casual consumer app you scroll through on the couch while watching TV. We're talking about an inventory management system someone stares at for 8 hours a day.
What's fascinating here is that in all these examples, medtech, industrial environments, complex B2B platforms, if you skip the research, you don't just miss minor aesthetic preferences. You miss reality entirely.
Wait, miss reality? You mean they get the terminology wrong? Or are we talking about fundamentally misunderstanding the physical mechanics of the job?
Fundamentally misunderstanding the mechanics.
Wow.
Yeah. According to the text, without deep research of these distant scenarios, you completely miss the hidden constraints that dictate user behavior. You miss the physical shortcuts workers have invented just to survive their shifts.
Hmm.
And perhaps most importantly, you completely misunderstand what a concept like simple actually means in their world.
Oh, the definition of simple. That makes perfect sense.
Right.
Because in industrial B2B, a designer's idea of a clean, simple interface is probably like a minimalist screen with lots of white space, tiny, elegant typography, and a bunch of functions neatly tucked away into hidden hamburger menus.
Exactly. But simple to that factory worker wearing thick Kevlar gloves means a massive, high-contrast, indestructible button that does exactly one thing instantly.
Oh, yeah. A hidden hamburger menu isn't clean to them. It's a physical hazard.
Yes, it slows them down. If you rely on your own design intuition in that environment, you fail. As Intunio puts it, research in these distant environments is the literal difference between a system that works beautifully in theory and one that actually survives contact with reality.
But if a massive contextual gap between the creator and the user demands deep, expensive research to bridge it, what is the protocol when the user is practically right next door?
Well, this is where the text introduces the pragmatic alternative. We can call it the consumer exemption.
Okay.
The author breaks down specific scenarios where that extensive upfront research sprint has a significantly lower value, specifically because the distance is so short.
Right. So we're talking about situations where the target group is broad and well known, like everyday smartphone users looking for a basic calendar app or an e-commerce checkout flow. The context is incredibly easy to understand because we all engage in it daily.
Or scenarios where your development team has already built similar products many times before, so they have a wealth of historical data to lean on.
That makes sense.
And of course, the ultimate short-distance scenario is when the client commissioning the project actually is the primary end user of the tool being built.
Here's where it gets really interesting because the article is very careful to clarify a potential misunderstanding.
Oh, definitely.
Skipping the formal 100,000 kroner upfront research phase does not mean you just ignore the user entirely.
No, not at all.
You don't just lock your developers in a dark room, guess at the features, and hope for the best. You just change the timeline of the research.
You shift the resources. Instead of spending 10% of your budget on a theoretical study before you build, you adopt an alternative workflow.
But wait, if we are skipping upfront research, aren't we just using our first wave of live customers as guinea pigs?
Well, sort of.
How does a team actually execute this alternative workflow without just launching a messy, confusing product and alienating their early adopters?
They mitigate the risk by relying on established conventions. Because the contextual distance is short, the team can safely use standard UI patterns, things users already intuitively understand.
Ah,
The text says you start designing and prototyping immediately. You get something tangible on the screen as fast as possible. Then you test it early, and you test it simply.
so instead of asking a focus group hypothetical questions about what they might click, you put a functional prototype in their hands and watch what they actually click.
Exactly. You gather your feedback on the fly, continuously. You might use feature flags, release a closed beta, or track backend analytics to see where users are dropping off. You are still doing research, but it's post-launch research based on actual behavioral data. You adjust the product based on real-world usage.
The phrasing in the article is really poignant when describing this shift. It says that in these close proximity cases, user research becomes something you grow into, rather than something that's strictly required from day one.
Yeah, I love that phrasing.
You launch a solid foundational product based on educated assumptions, you observe the reality of how it's used, and you adapt the interface accordingly.
You grow into it. It's a highly efficient way to operate.
It really is.
It takes the massive financial pressure off that initial project budget, and allows the product to evolve naturally, guided by the users themselves, rather than by a static document written months before the code was compiled.
So what does this all mean?
Right.
Looking at everything we've covered from Tobias Reidenhag's piece, it really synthesizes into a pragmatic middle ground. The tech industry loves absolutes, but this isn't a binary choice of we must do rigorous research versus we will do absolutely zero research and just guess.
No, it's not binary at all.
It's entirely about when you do it, how much of it you do, and where in the product life cycle it's going to do the absolute most good for both the user and the budget.
It is a powerful call for critical thinking over blind compliance. As the author notes, sometimes deep, rigorous research is undeniably crucial. You cannot skip it when designing for a hospital. You cannot skip it when designing for a factory floor.
The stakes are too high.
Exactly.
Yep.
The contextual distance demands the investment, but other times, when building a straightforward consumer tool, experience, common sense, reliance on established design patterns, and some quick, simple live validation are more than enough to get you to the finish line successfully.
Yeah.
The best, most responsible answer is usually found somewhere in between the two extremes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a stark reminder that prioritizing a budget requires ruthless pragmatism.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter if you are in software design, commercial construction, event planning, or corporate education. Every dollar or every krona you spend on preparing to do the work is a dollar you cannot spend actually executing the work.
Right.
You have to ensure that your preparation is genuinely adding value, not just checking a box to satisfy an industry norm.
Which brings us right back to that concept of decision insurance you mentioned at the very beginning.
Yes.
It is completely fine for a team to buy insurance as long as they know exactly why they are buying it, what it is protecting them from, and what that premium is costing the final product.
Knowing the true cost of your safety nets, that leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to mull over today.
Let's hear it.
If we can accept that formal user research, one of the most fiercely defended, untouchable practices in the tech world, can sometimes just be an expensive, optional alibi that confirms what we already know. What other sacred must-do practices in your own industry are actually just optional decision insurance disguised as mandatory work.